It's to be a very sunny day today. You're back, Lisa. All right. Brian. Okay, good to go. All right, Terry. Good. All right, let's hop back on this thing here. Okay. LAN technologies. We talked about, the Ethernet. It is a layer 2, but it's actually layer 1 and layer 2 technology. But it's mostly layer 2. Frames, because it is data link. It is baseband, one channel. Remember, we talked about that. Only one workstation can be talking at any one time. CSMA-CD, right? Carrier sense multiple access, collision detect. And on the wireless, it's collision avoid. T&E carriers, these are, I don't know, if these things are your thing, boy, I envy you, because these numbers just does not stick in my mind. So for me, it'll be a cram item for me. These are some of the information that you have to be familiar with when you go take your exam. So I'm just going to skip across this. LAN technologies. You need to know frame relay. It is considered legacy. In fact, in the Cisco exams, frame relay no longer is part of the exam, not for CCNA anyway. Hi, hey Raymond. So it is layer 2. When we talk about layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, what we mean here is that because frame relay is layer 2, it really doesn't care what layer 3 you have. Right? So layer 3 is what makes the difference mainly for TCP/IP. So what frame relay is saying is that I don't care if you use TCP/IP or anything else. You can just use me as a layer 2. Okay? But when we talk about IPsec, that's different, because IPsec is layer 3 and it has to use IP. So IPsec only works if you're using TCP/IP. Okay? Frame relay is called packet switch. No error recovery. Well, what they mean is that for you, as a user of the frame relay vendor, going into the frame relay cloud, you'll see a little picture a little bit later on. There's no error recovery. Within that, there's no scheme that you can use for error recovery. So, we would basically our application has to recognize if there's any kind of an error. Frame relay is not going to give you that intelligence. They use the concept of virtual circuits. So it will multiplex, right, through multiple logical connections. So you can have, 3 connections to 3 different locations, but you only use 1 physical connection into the frame relay cloud over 1 physical connection. There are something called PVCs and SVCs. So PVC is dedicated circuit, permanent virtual circuit, and SVC terminates connection after, if it idles, it has to recreate that circuit again. And most of the time, people use PVCs. And I do have this picture of what a frame relay looks like. And no, you don't have to know this picture. Right? This is just to kind of show you, in pictures what we're just talking about in words. Just very quickly, you see at the apex of this triangle, you see R1, and then on the left you have R2, and on the right you have R3. Okay. And if you, as a company, let's say, has a headquarters in R1 and subsidiaries in R2 and R3, you probably want to connect those things up. And if you have the money, hey, maybe a lease line. If you wanted to actually do something like a lease line, you would probably have to have 2 connections going out from R2, 2 connections going out from R3, and 2 connections going from R1. Right? So that's where all those lines are. You see the line, like a black and gray line going across, tying those things together. But if you're using frame relay vendor, right? Frame relay vendor is the one that has a frame relay network that they'll let you use as a service. You just need to have 1 physical connection. That's why you see a big conduit around those 2 connections. So the actual connections that you see connecting each of these routers are logical connections. They're not physical connections, they're logical. And the big circle right outside it, right, circumference outside it, is the physical connection. So you only have 1 big old pipe going into the cloud, and that's all you need. Right? That's basically what they're saying. And everything else, really, it's just too much information. The thing about DLCIs, yeah, DLCIs are it's mostly locally unique numbers that identifies the endpoint for that R2. So, for example, R2 would have, DLC I102 and DLCI 301. See that? Okay. And R3 has DLCI 302 and DLCI 202, right, etc. Okay. And those numbers are significant to the frame relay service provider, so that they know where to send from, which DLCI to which DLCI. Okay. And DLCIs map to the contract that you have with these vendors, so that they know exactly, where those things are supposed to connect on the other side. So how they're routed, if they are even routed at all, is a magic of frame relay service provider. Okay, so that is the frame relay. MPLS, multi-protocol label switching, more popular than ATM, asynchronous mode transfer mode. How many of you used ATMs? Asynchronous transfer mode. I had some customers that used to use it. They said they're not using it anymore. Very expensive, very hard to be compatible with other vendors. So you basically have to have your own, ATM network that is compatible. Very expensive. MPLS, I've had customers still using it. I think universities use it, right? MPLS. I have my buddy in Wisconsin using it. You're not using it, Terry? Is that right? They're usually used for... Oh, okay, so you're not worried about the bandwidth. Okay, all right. Yeah, MPLS is very good at doing streaming media. Yeah, there you go. So you don't need it. Okay. All right. So those are some LAN technologies, and I'm sure there are others in the book. Network device and protocols. Now this is the part that we've already covered. So once again, devices, just to repeaters and hubs, layer 1. Bridges and switches, layer 2. Routers, layer 3. Modems, layer 1. I have so much information on the modem. I had one customer one time. He insisted that modems were layer 3. So I just couldn't, but he would not have it. Modems are layer 3. So I said, okay. And I came back the next day. I gave them all this information. But it's layer 1. Okay. Firewalls, multi-home. Multi-home means that you have multiple network interface cards, either real or not real, okay, either physical or virtual, and they are filtered. Most routers have multiple network interface cards, but normally router is not a firewall, so it's not going to try to filter it. We know that it does, right? Because it does have an ACL, access control list. But pure routers will just forward, right, from one interface to will route, right, from one interface to another. Whereas multi-home is not a router, but it filters, right, from one interface to another, and then whatever passes the filter gets to the other side. Okay? So that's basically what a multi-home is. Packet filter firewall. We talked about layer 3 and 4 as being packet filter because it's only looking one packet at a time, right? Or one unit of data at a time. Nothing. It doesn't really care about the historicals. What happened before, and what we're leading up to, of course, is session. Okay, because session takes multiple packets. The packet filters do not look at multiple packets, so that means it doesn't have any concept of a session. Okay, so no concept of state, and when we're talking about sessions, single packet at a time. Stateful firewall is, of course, the specific layer that we're talking about is layer 5. Okay, but of course everything below it counts too. So you have layer 5 as a minimum. It could be 3 through 7 as well. Okay, including 5. But the key point is the layer 5, keeping track of the session. So if something comes in that says, hey, are you trying to create a session? Okay, if so, I'll let you go. Hey, you know, do you already have a session? Okay, you can go. Hey, do you not have a session? Why are you trying to do this? You know, and maybe drop it. Okay, so these are the kind of firewalls that looks at multiple packets or the state. Okay. Proxy, we talked about forward proxy and reverse proxy. It terminates connection, right? So that's the main point. Application layer proxy firewalls. So we talked about the WAF. Oh, what happened? Yeah, I think there's just too much information. But layer 7 WAF is what you see there. Okay, devices continue. IDSs and IPSs, right? They are detective. Network IDSs, host-based IDSs, and I believe we know, the difference between the two. IPSs, I usually like to think the IDSs with the teeth, so they can actually act on to do something to stop the malicious activity. It is preventive, right? Because they'll try to stop. Endpoint security, we also talked about this. Stopping leakage from the endpoints. You have antivirus, application whitelisting. So here's the one. The whitelisting. Okay, whitelisting, blacklisting. What is whitelisting? Whitelisting? Yeah. Allow list. That's right. So if you have a list of things, let's say it's application whitelisting, so it's all the application that you can install in this particular endpoint, and if it's not in there, you cannot, right? So it's called the implicit deny. So if it's not in there, we deny it. Okay? Blacklisting it's a denied list. So all the applications that you cannot install in this particular computer, everything else is allow. So this is called the implicit allow. All right, which one is more restrictive? Whitelisting or blacklisting? That's right. Whitelisting is more restrictive because everything else is deny. So implicit deny is more strict than implicit allow, right? Because implicit allow says, other than these 5 things, anything is possible, right? So that means it's infinite, right? Whereas the other one that says, look, only these 3 things are allowed and that's it. You don't get to do anything else. All right. Media controls will be 1, USBs. Disk encryption, whole disk encryption is standard. HIPS, desktop firewalls, right? Host-based IPSs, desktop firewalls also needs to be in there. Okay. See how fast these things are going? All right, so the protocols and routing. We talked about the autonomous system. So here we have autonomous system 100, autonomous system 200, and the routing between them is called the exterior gateway protocol, right? Exterior gateway protocol. And the example of the protocol is BGP, right? Within the ASs, you have interior gateway protocols. You have the RIP, you have the IGRP, interior gateway routing protocol. You have the EIGRP, right? Enhanced IGRP opens shortest path first, OSPF, and ISIS, right? So these are the examples of the interior gateway protocols. Okay. But the point of all this is, as far as the router is concerned, it wants to have the most greatest and latest routing table. That's it, routing table. Routing table needs to be updated and understand the cost. So for these different protocols, they have the different concept of cost. RIP, Routing Information Protocol, very, very chatty, pretty old. Unless you don't have an IT IT people in the midst and you have to set up a routing protocol, RIP probably may be a good one for you. For Cisco CCNA, they don't even talk about RIP anymore. OSPF, Open Source Path First, EIGRP, Enhanced Interior Gateway Routing Protocol. Okay, there you go, BGP, Border Gateway Protocol. Okay, here we go. Now the protocols themselves. This is the TCP header, okay? And if you look at this, so let me just flip just quickly back to my whiteboard. Okay. Okay, so hang on here. So let me go back. All right, what I want to show you is this. Let's say you have the data. Why I'm drawing this thing so small? Hang on. Let's say you have the data. Okay, and you have the layer header. Okay, and you have the transport layer header, and you have the network layer header, and finally you have the data link layer header and data link layer trailer. Right, that's basically what we're looking at. So let's take a look at the data link header because before going. So when we say TCP header, we're talking about here, and when we talk about IP header, we're looking at here. Okay, and the frame, of course, header is the data link header. So let me just so notice this is how it's going to work. In fact, at one point, a little bit later on, I'm going to show you these two headers together. Okay, that's why I'm drawing this picture so that you understand why they're like two things kind of layered on top of each other. Okay. Alrighty, so. Okay, I think that's a little bit too much information though, so hang on. Yeah, I like this, but actually using OSI, so it's not. Oh, there's. Yeah, why not? Here it is. That's what I should have done, Ethernet header. So let me just show you this one. Okay. So Ethernet, right? Because these header looks different if you're using different technology. So I'm just showing you Ethernet. So you see the data link header, destination MAC address, source MAC address, and the Ethernet type. Okay. And you see the data, and you see the file check sequence. The data in CRC, so you see there FCS. This is actually perfect. In fact, I think I'm just going to grab this for later on. Wow, this is actually good. A find. I can't fix it right now. Anyhow, so do you understand how this thing looks like, right? So that's what you see at the data link layer for Ethernet. Okay, and now then going back to peeling. So within this data, you have everything else, right? So including the header information for network layer and header information for the transport layer, etc. Okay? All right, so now we will go into, okay, so we'll go to TCP header. It's in your slides, but I just want to show you the one that is together so that you can kind of get the feel. All right, so this one is the header information together. You have the IP header, which is the network layer, and you have the TCP header, which is the transport layer. Okay, so let's take a look at the And of course, on the outside of that is you have the data link header, which is for the Ethernet. Okay. Let's look at the IP header. The information that you need to know here is look at the identification. Okay, so every time it's a ID number, and I believe this is the one where every time a new packet is sent, the ID is incremented. Okay, so it's called IP ID. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Fragment offset. It's possible that the original IP packet needs to be broken down into little smaller pieces. So each of them is going to be a fragment. So if one IP packet, the whole size, is broken down into 3 little pieces, then every little piece needs to know where they fit back in when it gets to the other side. So for that, you need something called a fragment offset. So it's a fragment of itself. So it needs to know where it belongs to. Okay. Time to live, that's TTL that we talked about earlier on the trace route. Source address and destination addresses. So these are source IP address and destination IP address. And remember, any of these values can be changed by a hacker. It's called the packet crafting. You can craft a packet. You can make these things. So of course, if you don't craft the packet, it just works, right? But if you craft the packet, that's how you do spoofing. They can go into, let's say, the source IP address and change it, right? So that's basically that. So that is the IP header. And then once the router, so this is basically what router sees. Router doesn't care anything else, okay? Unless, of course, you ask the router to do something called the extended ACL, which we talked about, which you force the router to peel back and look at the TCP header and look at the services, right? So you see in TCP header, you see source port, destination port, okay? And in TCP, remember how I said that the session layer stuff is in there a little bit, okay? So we know that the transport layer, right, it is the flow control, it is the error detection and error correction. Well, the mechanism that it uses to do the flow control and the error detection and error correction partly has to do with sequence numbers that you see there. So you see the sequence number and the acknowledgement number, and we'll talk about how these things work. And then you have the next line. You have these little pieces, URG, ACK, piece, all these, right? These are called flags, and these are session flags. And these are all 1 bits. So we talk about session, the flag being set or not set. If it's set, it is set to 1. If it's not set, it is set to 0. Okay. So this is the piece you'll see pretty soon when we do the 3-way handshake to create a session. This is the piece that tells you which sequence that you are in right now when you're trying to create a session. That's why I state that in the transport layer, when you map it back from the OSI back to TCP/IP, the TCP/IP's transport layer, which is is this header information, does have session information in it. That's why it goes right into the session part. Okay. There it is. I believe that's all you actually need to know, and we'll see how these things work, right? So that's what a header and trailer information looks like. Any questions? Okay, all right. So there it is. Okay, so that is the TCP, and here's the UDP, right? As I mentioned, UDP does not have the concept of session. It's pretty simple. That's all you see. You see the source port and the destination port. And yes, UDPs do have ports. Okay, and that's it. Length and checksum. There you go. All right. So let's take a look at the handshake. Okay. So this is a handshake that is used for TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, to create a session. Remember, TCP requires that the other party also is up and working, and that you confirm it, the fact that they are willing to have a conversation with you or have a session with you. Okay. So the initiator, let's say, is A. Listener, let's say B. Maybe something like a server. A contacts B and say, hey, let's have a communication, something like HTTP. Okay. So you send a SYN. SYN is short for synchronize. Okay. So synchronize means that it's almost like the SWAT team, right? The SWAT team leader tells the group, all right, we're going to go in there in 3 minutes. Now I want you to all set your time, and when I count to 3, that's when you mark. Okay, 1, 2, 3, mark. Boom. Right. So you mark the time. It's like this. That's what SYN is basically. And with a SYN, they send a sequence number. It says, look, this is a sequence number that we're going to start for my end of the session. And the listening part, if the port is open, if the service is available, because the SYN goes to a particular port. If the port is open, they'll return and say, I acknowledge that. I acknowledge ACK. Okay? And also send another SYN, say, look, I also want you to synchronize on my sequence number for my end of the conversation. Okay? So 1, 2, 3, mark, sync. Right? So then you send the sync, and then the other party says, oh, I acknowledge that. Okay? That's basically how these things work. Okay? So this is called the three-way handshake. So people call it SYN, SYN-ACK, ACK. And basically what happens here is this. If you go back to X, SYN, the SYN flag is set to 1 and everything else is set to 0. For SYN-ACK, you have the ACK and the SYN set to 1, everything else is set to 0. And then for the ACK, you have ACK bit set to 1, everything else set to 0. Okay? And just understand that so those are the signs that says, look, I'm in this particular phase of the session. Okay? And going back to three-way handshake. So the next one is how do you end the session? Okay? Because when you create a session, you have to tear down the session after you're finished with it. Right? So that's the proper thing to do. So in between, just imagine, they chat for a while, with HTTP, sending back and forth the web pages. Okay? And then it says, I'm done. Right? When you say you're done, whoever's calling it sends a fin, says, I'm finished. Okay? And then the other party acknowledges, says, okay, good to go. And then later on, it also sends a fin. Says, look, I'm also ready to finish, and the other party says, acknowledge that. So it's fin, ACK, fin, ACK. Okay, any questions on the handshakes? Once again, whenever you have a fin, the fin flag is set, everything else is 0. So you see the firewall that's cognizant of sessions are looking for those flags to make sure that they're being used in the right order at the right time. If not, they drop it. Any questions? Okay, because look, the next one, you have to have been listening to this to understand. Okay? All right, so here's the example. I am first going to explain the example, and then we will do the second round where there is something called the session hijacking. Okay, session hijacking, because session hijacking occurs at this layer. Oh, by the way, session hijacking occurs actually at 2 layers. One at layer 5 in the OSI, which is a session layer, and layer 7, which is at the application layer. Something like session hijacking of a HTTP session, which is quite different from a TCP session. Okay, and in general, if one is an attacker, right, is it advantageous for you to do any kind of exploit like session hijacking at the lower layers, like session 5, layer 5, or higher layers, like layer 7? If you had a choice, which one would you go for? Layer 5 or layer 7, session hijacking? And tell me why. Nobody want to take a shot at it? You have an option to do session hijacking as a hacker at layer 5 or layer 7. Which one would you choose? Christopher. It seems easier. Well, okay. So you would choose layer 7 because it seems easier. Okay, fair enough. Anybody else? Okay. So maybe I'll put it this way. All right. So let's say, and now it's outside the OSI because this. So let's say you're like attacking the application, right? So you have the option of attacking the operating system. Let's say it's Windows. You have the option of attacking Windows, attacking IIS, attacking the .NET application that is on the IIS. Which one would you go for if you had an option? And all were, let's say, just as difficult or just as easy. Would you want to compromise Windows, compromise the IIS, or compromise the application on the IIS? The operating system. Okay, so why OS, Christopher? Reason. It gives more capability and control over the other two. That's right. Because it's at the lower, right? It's at the lower layer. Because everything else is built on top of it, isn't it? Yeah. So the same concept applies for the OSI. So oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. And so I'll show you then next. So exactly, I do understand that. But of course it does depend upon the vulnerability, right? And I do understand that the application is more visible. It is more available. Yeah. So it would seem easier. But if you have the option, right? So that was the qualification. So in general, it would be much better for the hacker to compromise the lowest layer possible because everything else sits on top of it. And the advantage for the hacker of the layered design is that if I were to compromise something at layer 5, layer 6 is not going to know about it because they totally rely on layer 5 or the the lower layer. Okay, so just for kicks, all right, let's take a look and see how you would compromise layer 5. All right, so before we compromise layer 5, we have to understand this thing about the sequence numbers and acknowledgement numbers. Okay, and it may get a little confusing, so if it does, please stop me. The sequence numbers and acknowledgement numbers, this works, right? Remember, this information was in the header information for TCP. So this is the transport layer information coming through. Okay? And sequence numbers and acknowledgement numbers are used for flow control and also for error detection and error correction. So right there, let's take a look and see the thing on the left, let's say is A, and thing on the right is B. Okay, A and B. So A is talking to B. Okay? What you're seeing here is you see the first three going back and forth. This is a three-way handshake. You see the SYN, SYN-ACK, ACK. And then the A is asking to get something, so obviously this is HTTP. B is giving a redirect. A is going to the redirect site and getting the page, and then the B is serving that page. Right. So that's basically what this whole thing is about. So let's follow the sequence number and acknowledgement number, and this will become very important, just a little bit later on. And oh, by the way, yes, you do have to know about session hijacking using sequence numbers. Okay, so this is it's a type of an attack that's coming. So initially, remember I told you it says SYN means synchronize. Synchronize on my sequence number. So A is sending a SYN to B, and it says here's the sequence number 0. Okay. Now in reality, this is actually what it was before, like way back when TCP/IP first started. Sequence number all started from 0, but because of the attack that I'm about to explain to you, they've changed that. So the sequence numbers now start at any random number. well, not any, but within the range of the sequence numbers, it's going to start from a random value. Okay. The acknowledgement number is at this point 0, because the acknowledgement number is about acknowledging the other side, so which you'll see pretty soon. Here we go. Sequence number 0, acknowledgement number 0, send from A to B. Okay. Now B is going to send an ACK, right? So the acknowledgement is it's acknowledging the sequence number of A, which it was sent. So it's I acknowledge that, okay? And it is going to add 1 to the sequence number. So because the sequence number was 0 previously, there's 1 to it. So that's why you have ACK of 1. Sequence number going from B to A is still 0, because this one, remember I said that B also sends a SYN, say, hey, synchronize with my sequence number. So in this case, they're starting from 0 once again, but this could also start from any random number. So there you go. Now we got the sequence number started. And then A sends to B an ACK, right? So acknowledge. So notice that the ACK is for B's transmission to A. So it takes the sequence number, previous sequence number, which is 0, okay, and adds 1 to it. And the ACK acknowledgement number is 1. Notice that the sequence number is 1 now, right, from A going to B. This is because the sequence number equals to the acknowledgement number that was sent previously. So if you see 1 before and you see the acknowledgement number of 1, that's what the sequence number is supposed to start from. Okay? And this adding 1 thing is what happens on the handshakes. Any questions so far? Are you able to follow this? Okay. If not, just let me know, okay? So then A sends to B a GET request, okay? And sequence number is still 1 because the acknowledgement number has not changed, right? So B hasn't sent anything. So sequence number is still 1, acknowledgement number is still 1, that doesn't change. And then the length is 100 bytes. So the information that was sent from A to B is 100 bytes. Now take a look at this. Now B sends back a redirect. Look at the sequence number, right? Sequence number is equal to the previous acknowledgement number, which was 1. So the sequence number is 1. Acknowledgement number now is the previous sequence number, which is 1, plus the byte of information that was sent, 100. So it's 1 plus 100 is 101. Okay? And the length now is 200, whatever that is, right? So it's a redirect, it's 200 bytes. Okay? Then A goes to B, get en-us. Okay? All right, let's see if you could figure out the sequence number. Sequence number is 101 because it's the previous acknowledgement number. Okay? And acknowledgement number is the previous sequence number plus the bytes of information. So it's 1 plus 200, so it's 201. And now you send a length of 50 bytes. That is a GET command. And then finally, B sends back an OK. Sequence number is the previous acknowledgement number, which is 201. Acknowledgement number is the previous sequence number plus the byte of information, which is 151. And now the length is 1000. We know the length just depends upon what you're doing. Okay? But what's important is the sequence number and the acknowledgement number. Okay? So just imagine if you are A, okay? And in the end, where you are expecting sequence number 201 with acknowledgement number 151, but instead you get acknowledgement number of, like, let's say 100. They say, that's weird, right? Because the acknowledgement number is sequence number plus the byte of information, and I sent 50 bytes, okay? So how come B isn't acknowledging the fact that it received 50 bytes. You see? So A and B is always keeping track of what the sequence number and acknowledgement number is supposed to be, so that if you don't get what you expected, then you say there was an error. You must have not received my 50 bytes. You see how that works? So if you didn't receive the 50 bytes, then I'm going to resend this information. You see? Can you confirm for me that you understand this part? If not, what's what part? Okay. Okay, good. It's not an easy concept, right? If you've never seen it before. So okay, so the reason why the ACK is 151 is the acknowledgement number is the you add the sequence number previously, which is 101, right? And then you add the 50 bytes. So you add 101 plus 50. And that becomes the acknowledgement number for the opposite side. Yep, exactly. So that's how they start adding numbers back and forth. Okay. So now this is how it's supposed to work. So now let's take a look at how it works sometimes to the detriment, okay, of this whole thing. And this is an example of what's called the session hijacking. Okay, so let's take a look at it. So I'm going to go to the whiteboard. Okay, so same thing. Try to follow along. Okay. So you have the server. You have the server A. Oh, I'm sorry. Here's B. And here's A, the client. Okay, here we go. Then okay, so the SYN has a sequence number equals to 0. Acknowledgement number equals to 0. So far so good. Okay, and then this sends SYN ACK. Okay, so SYN ACK then is sequence number equals the previous acknowledgement. Well, sequence number is actually for B, so it's going to start from 0. So it's, look, here's my new sequence number, but the acknowledgement number, right, takes the previous sequence number and adds 1 to it, so it's 1. And then this is going to say I ACK, acknowledge that. ACK, right? So sequence number is the previous acknowledgement number, so equals to 1. Acknowledgement number is the previous sequence number plus 1, so equals to 1. Okay, so that's the three-way handshake. This is a three-way. And if you recall on the earlier example, this guy sends a GET. Okay, so the sequence number, right, is the previous acknowledgement number, which is 1. Acknowledgement number, right, equals to the previous sequence number. Oh, in this case, let me see. Oh, hang on. Sorry. So because A is just sending and B is not sending, acknowledgement number and sequence number stays the same, and the bytes of information was 100. And then this person sends back, right, a redirect. Okay, so the sequence number is the previous acknowledgement number, and acknowledgement number, the previous sequence number plus the byte of information, so it's 101. And this person sends, okay, so let's take a look at it, right? So this person sends, let me see, so it's redirect, and it does a GET. Okay, the sequence number is the previous acknowledgement number, so it's 101. And acknowledgement number, so the redirect came with the, let me see, redirect came with 200 bytes. So bytes were 200. The acknowledgement number is the previous sequence number plus the acknowledgement number. I'm sorry, sequence number plus the byte number, so it's 201. Okay, and the length was 50. Okay, and finally, they send the information, so it was 200. Okay. So the sequence number is the previous acknowledgement number, so it's 201. Okay, and acknowledgement number, right, is the previous sequence number plus the byte of information, so it's 151. Okay, and the length is, byte information is 1000. So here's the question. Here's a question, okay? Let's say the next communication that goes from here to there, okay? Whatever it is, maybe it's a get. Tell me what sequence number is supposed to be. What is the sequence number? Somebody tell me, what is the sequence number? Oh, I see what you're saying. No, the sequence number, Terry, is the... No. The sequence number is the previous acknowledgement number. So it's 151. Look at the previous acknowledgement number. So the sequence number is the previous acknowledgement number. Yeah, okay, very good. So sequence number is 151. The acknowledgement number is you take the previous sequence number plus 1000, right? So you have 1201, okay? So if you understand that, you can be a hacker. So because what's happening here is that, let's say the hacker has been listening in on this conversation. It's been listening in on this all along, okay? And before A sends that information, the hacker is going to sneak and put this information in, and it will do something like a get with a sequence number equals to 151 and the acknowledgement number equals to 1201. Okay, so the whole trick to this thing is to guess what the next sequence number and acknowledgement number is supposed to be and send it back to the recipient. Right? So now B is going to get this information before A sends it. Okay, and once B receives this, correct sequence number and acknowledgement number from the hacker, it is going to now say, I'm talking to you now. Okay, and it's possible because everything goes very quickly. In fact, let me just kind of let me move. Let's see if I can move this thing. See if I can move this thing. Hang on here. Alright, so let's say I'm just making more room for myself here. Okay, so okay, so let's say that before A can respond back, because A doesn't have no idea what's happening with the hacker in the server. Okay, let's say that they've already had, couple of communication already, right? So they send something back, and a couple of things going on. And when A hops in with this one, what do you think happens to the sequence number and acknowledgement number between hacker and the server? Right? It keeps on incrementing, doesn't it? So by the time A sends this thing back, B looks at it and say, look, you're out of sequence. It's not 151 anymore. You know, like, what are you talking about? So you're out of sequence, okay? So you're out of the game. So now you don't get to talk to the server. Talking, hacker, and the server. What if this thing was like something like a bank, you know, communication? So A and B talking, logged in, happily looking at the nice screen for the bank, and then H comes in, right? Takes over. And A gets disconnected because it's out of sync. Okay? So this is the mechanism for session hijacking at layer 5. What are your questions? Any questions? Do you see how that works? So Chris, do you think this is difficult to do? Doesn't seem difficult, right? Yeah. So there are a couple things, of course, that people try to protect themselves by. So if this whole thing is encrypted over SSL, that's going to be pretty difficult, right? Because you won't be able to see the sequence numbers and acknowledgement numbers. Okay. But if you have the visibility into it, and if you have the tool, you can do it. And then is there something weird going on here? So if you were the server, if you were B, all of a sudden, you know, you were talking to A, and all of a sudden now you're talking to H. And spoofing doesn't happen here because the H wants to receive and talk to the server. So if you spoof, it goes someplace else, right? Because spoofing address is not yourself. So this is not a spoof. So B sees H's IP address. So why do you think B allows that to happen? I mean, the IP address changed in midstream of a session. Why would that be okay? Can you think of a reason why this is okay for server, or is this a vulnerability? Very good, Christopher. That's right. So naturally, in TCP/IP, IP addresses change. Naturally. So let's say you're wandering Wi-Fi, you change the access point, now you've been assigned a different IP address. You certainly don't want your banking transaction to stop just because you went across from one access point to another, right? Or maybe you're in a car and you're a passenger, of course, in a car, looking at your bank account or something, from your iPhone, and there you go. You're zooming across the highway, you're changing IP addresses all over the place. Right? Yeah, so this is natural. So this attack takes advantage of that fact. There you go. This is a castle built on sand. Yeah, Christopher, did you have something to add? The goal is just DOS. Can't H just replay any small packet he seems to make? You know what? So that would be a different attack. Right. So first, so that would be a DOS attack. Right. Exactly. So actually this is called a replay attack, what you're just talking about, Christopher. So so this one is not a replay attack, but is a session hijacking attack. So let's say that's separate, okay? And then let's talk about DOS. It's not even going to be DOS. In fact, Christopher, let's say you are H, and it is encrypted. you grab hold of the encrypted traffic, and at a later period you send it back to B, hoping not for a DOS, but hoping for a login. Because you say, look, I grabbed hold of this transmission that's going between A and B right at the beginning, so it must be that three-way handshake, it must be the username and password, it must be, getting access to the system. So let me just grab hold of that and send it back. And if, hey, it's 50-50, right? It may work or not work. And if it does work, bonanza. Yeah. So, but sending replay attack probably will not cause a DOS though. Because DOS has to be, B is not expecting something and, it mishandles something. It could, I guess. But replay attack is usually not a DOS attack. Does that make sense, Christopher? Or did that explain, did that answer your question? Do you still have a, yeah. Replay would desync the sequence between A and B and thereby killing the session. No, see, so if you just replay, okay, that means the hacker is sending, so you're replaying at some later time. And now the acknowledgement number and sequence number has progressed. So chances are the hacker is not going to be able to get into the session because the hacker has the old sequence number and acknowledgement number. Yeah, yeah. Okay, good questions. Thank you for that. So it's at the top of the hour, so let's take a quick break. We'll take a 10-minute break, and when we come back, we will go another hour until lunch. All right, so see you back then. All right, see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you.